a psychologist by profession, working mainly with people that are grieving and people that are struggling with losses or struggling with traumas that they've been burdens of traumas that people have been carrying from time immemorial. Sometimes we don't know that we are actually carrying traumas. That's because where we come from, our society, maybe wherever we come from, our families, or whether it's at work or in relationships, sometimes we don't know that we are actually harboring some trauma. And therefore, as a grief and loss and trauma therapist, what I do is to help people to identify or to realize if they are actually carrying trauma, which everybody does. And I'm also honored to be here today to speak about grief and the effects of floods and with regard to grief, understanding, just like Paps had started by saying, sometimes we don't understand that losses can come in diverse ways. Sometimes we only think that grief could only be a loss in terms of death. But sometimes it can be because of other losses that are seen, unseen, or perhaps even trivialized. And maybe I'm sorry, I am supposed to be projecting, but I encountered a little bit of a hitch. So by the time someone is trying to do that for me so that I project, but maybe for the benefit of time, I could quickly be reading from my screen because currently I'm holding my phone. So to save on time, as we are all understanding right now, we're going through a very difficult time as a nation, also as a world, because the rains that we just experienced recently and are still experiencing are not only in Kenya, but in so many other parts of the world. And maybe I could start by talking about what loss is. Just like I said, loss is never a simple matter. Each person's experience of grief and loss is different, and understanding our own responses makes us better able to cope and maintain mental wellness. Loss applies not only to death. We grieve when anything we value, a loved one, our health, our job or expected future is taken away, and when we face sudden changes like what has just happened recently. And I think one of the things that I wanted to focus on mainly is our children, because as parents, maybe we might know how to deal with grief. As a parent, I could be able to sit and discuss with I could be able to share with fellow parents about losses. But imagine a child who is as young as 2 years, not understanding why or what is happening currently. And maybe I could start by just mentioning a few types of griefs so that we can see what could be a problem maybe with our children, and therefore to understand how we can be able to help them. For instance, some griefs, we have what we obviously call sudden loss. That is what we know, that the usual deaths, like when we have someone die suddenly, and therefore we are left with a sense of shock because they died suddenly. Then we have what we call traumatic losses. Traumatic losses are what, like for instance, what happened to us during, everyone has been affected in some way by tragedies that have occurred in recent years, from the events of COVID-19, which brought the world to a standstill for close to even 2 years. Natural disasters, including now the current rains that have brought about death and property losses. Many people have been touched by these events at a deep human level. And one of the things, maybe what we don't realize, especially with children, our children, while we watch situations like when we watch news, even though we may not be able to explain to our children what is happening, while they watch news or while they are with their friends, they'll be able to hear things like what is happening out there. They are obviously, just like you might expect, in shock. Sometimes, even though it does not affect them directly, assuming wherever you live, you have not experienced any flood, your children are in classes with other kids that have experienced floods. And therefore, a child usually almost connects, actually doesn't just almost, but connects very well with another child in school, connects very well with say, a teacher. And if a teacher is suffering, so does your child, because remember, the teacher is the caregiver of your child. And therefore, if a teacher doesn't come to school because they lost, or maybe wherever they are, they could not arrive because of the rains, or when your child hears things like, we lost people in rains, people have died. Now, what happens to the children? They are thrown into what is called an anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is whereby, obviously, in regular, like in human, in adults' life, anticipatory grief could be something like when you know that, for instance, when we have a patient who is about to die, say they are terminally ill, and therefore we are being prepared for their death. That is anticipatory grief, because we know that they could be dying anytime. But now for children, they sort of are thrown into an anticipatory grief, especially during such times as this, when they hear other children have died, people have lost during the floods. They sort of go into a situation of grief, and even though they may not understand how to express it, because you can imagine when a child hears, all they think is, we might be the next people. Or they hear, if they can't, like for instance, when the government sort of like remember schools, there was an extension of the school holidays. So when a child hears that the reason the schools are being, the reason they cannot open school is because of the rains, they even think that this could be a killer. And the more they stay at home, in as much as they appear like they are children that are happy to stay at home, for the fact that they are experiencing an anticipatory grief, they are left with a lot of fear that they are unable to express. And as parents, we as parents are expected to understand that our children could just quickly go into situations that can cause them even to harbor things like trauma for the future. And one things maybe I would like to mention is that when children are experiencing anticipatory grief, there are some signs to look for. And obviously, this depends on child to child, and also depending on how, as a parent, you understand your child. Some of them you might find a child looks like they are lacking a focus. If they are used to playing a lot, normally, like how you see your child is usually very playful, because of the fact that they are heavily burdened with an anticipatory thought that if this rain comes, if I see the cloud, then it means it's going to rain. If they hear that, like for instance, we all have heard in the news that the people in my Mahio died through the night while they were sleeping. So every night when your children are going to sleep, every night there is things like a lot of rain or thunder, lightning. Those ones scare them a lot. And maybe some parents might even attest to the fact that some of their children have developed difficulty maybe sleeping, or they once in a while maybe woken up in the middle of the night. That's because they may not be able to know how to express it, but deep down they might be thinking, are we going to be the next victims? Are we going to die just like the people of my Mahu? Then the children also have something like another symptom, which is social withdrawal. That's because they are afraid to leave their regular, maybe they are afraid to go and play with the other kids. That's because they are wondering, what if I go and I die, or what if I go and leave my family behind only to come back and find that they died? They might also have things like anger, or what we would call tantrums, because normally with kids, I mean, for adults would be saying anger, but for kids we normally say they are throwing a tantrum. So kids might throw a tantrum because they don't have another way of expressing themselves. All they know is to just show up all they know is to show up in kiddie style of the tantrums, the usual lack of appetite. Because even when a child doesn't want when they do not want to get involved in play. Remember, a child's way of doing things is play, and so here they are withdrawn. So therefore, as parents, we need to watch out for such behaviors, because when your child is showing such behaviors, that means they are obviously harboring a lot of they are harboring a lot of thoughts, or they have the anticipatory grief. And as I said earlier, they also have difficulty concentrating. If they have difficulty concentrating, like if they are used to watching TV and the next thing you see is that they're sort of like, even when you ask them, like they startle. When you talk to them, you realize they have a startle. That's because maybe they were just busy thinking about what might happen to us, and therefore, as parents, the best thing you can always do is to make sure at every given time you're reassuring your children, because sometimes all we think is that, oh, as long as I am here, maybe they are not suffering as long as I am here. They also have another anxiety, which is the separation anxiety. Like if you're leaving for work, you realize that your child doesn't seem, especially if they're very young and maybe they don't know how to express themselves, they may develop what you call separation anxiety. So that when you want to leave the house, or if assuming it's a house help who's going to put clothes out on the line, they kind of want to follow you all over. So that's because they have just developed a separation anxiety. The other thing is that they could also suddenly develop regression, and this is they might revert to being kiddie, more of a like those little behaviors of a baby. Like for instance, they could just suddenly start bedwetting, and you wonder, why did they just start bedwetting, and this was a big kid? That's because their emotions are very high on, the anxiety they are going through at that moment means that's the reason you might find that they would be bedwetting. Others will just start, maybe a child that wasn't sucking their thumb, and suddenly you realize that they are sucking their thumb. Then of course they might also have another thing, which is a sort of impatience. Assuming your child has been this one patient child that you say to them, sit still, I'm doing this, I'm gonna bring you this, and suddenly the only thing they know is to be very impatient. Mom, can you please give me? And you're like, I told you I'm giving you. And of course, the more they become impatient, the more you also become almost like angered. Also, you could even spank them, because you're wondering, didn't I say, hang on, I'm gonna do it? So that tells you that a child is obviously going through a difficult moment. And inattentiveness, especially those that are going to school, this might be recognized by a teacher. It could be recognized by, maybe if you're a parent and you've been helping your child with homework, then at that moment you can suddenly realize that they become very inattentive. And then or trouble focusing in school, or if you look at their performance, you realize that if they have been kids that have been doing very well in school, then suddenly they are not doing as is expected. And sometimes you might even see a report from the teacher saying maybe they didn't finish this kind of job, rather homework, or they are showing an inattentiveness or no concentration in class, or they are suddenly becoming problematic. Maybe they are fighting their fellow students in class. So that is also one of those situations. Then there's also an issue with the children. You will also notice that they have a sense of protectiveness. They're almost becoming overly protective, especially of other siblings. For instance, if you have an older child, they could look more like they would appear overly protective of the other sibling. That's because they are afraid that because of flooding, or rather because of what we have been going through right now, the calamities that we are going through right now, they're trying to be overly protective, so that whatever is happening to other people or other children, it may not happen to their to their brother or to their sister, they become overly protective even at home, or with other so many other situations. And maybe to just quickly say how to maybe can help our children when we notice that our children are going through such a situations rather, we could help them by making sure, of course, one thing is to, as we said, is to make sure as a parent you're very observant, just to make sure that you're always getting to understand or see those times when your child seems to be losing a grip of who they are. When you realize such things, especially those things that are really really telling, like when a child starts sucking their thumb or bedwetting, that already tells you we have a problem here. But you could also, as parents, as we try to curb this, well, not that every child would ideally show some symptoms. Some children could not necessarily show the symptoms that we have mentioned, because the list is not exhaustive, but it's always good to look out for even any peculiar symptoms that could indicate that your child is going through a difficult moment. And maybe one of the things you could do, as a parent, you encourage to story tell, because when you're telling your child stories, then you are almost distracting them. You are, distracting them from the regular, or rather whatever is happening, the current situation. You're almost distracting them. So you make sure to give them stories that would cause a distraction rather than concentrate on the current times. Then you could tell them stories that would create a distraction. Then you could also ensure as parents, really, I don't know about you, but well, I'm a mother of adult kids, but in my time as a mother of young kids, we had a discipline of when to watch TV, because with the TV and obviously the phones, there's a lot of information that you cannot be able to control. You can never be able to control the news of, if it is breaking news and it says 100 people have died in floods, and your child is there reading or listening, and obviously as soon as this news is released, children are like a sponge. They don't even know how to filter. So that is how they will just siphon every bit of the news with all this fear, and they will not be able to understand how unlike an adult who will be like, oh, that is my mahio. For them, they don't even understand where my mahio is. All they think is my mahio could be like a kilometer from where we are. These floods could easily even flow to where we are right now. The mind of a child, they don't even know how to control. They wouldn't even be able to know. So number 2 is to make sure as a parent you could make sure that you what is called parental advisory, to just make sure when you're watching news, and especially when there are disasters, just make sure it's very important that you protect your child, actually, by ensuring that what kind of news they can watch and what kind of news they cannot watch. You're actually protecting them for such eventualities. Then you can have something like art therapy. Art therapy, you could make sure they, at least you can buy them coloring books so that they can be able to, draw or color, or you can create collages with them to just ensure that you're distracting their minds. You're rewarding them for every well-colored picture. You're rewarding them for every everything that is done well. There's a reward. So this way you are helping your child even to be distracted. And then, of course, play therapy. Ensure that even though your child, for the fact that they are clingy, they don't want to leave the house, they are withdrawn, they don't want to interact, just encourage them. And even if you can be able to participate in their play, even better, because then you are assuring your kid that all is well. You can do dancing with them. And then for those that can write, you also help them in writing. Maybe you ask them to write, you buy them journals so that they can be able to write. And then, of course, parents, because all of us are affected. As parents, of course, we are the caregivers here. And as it is right now with the floods, the effects of the floods coming upon all of us, and everybody is affected directly or indirectly, because whether the floods have come to you or not, they've come at least to someone you know. And if they haven't gone to someone you know, then it's affected us in so many ways: our work, our, where the people we know, even the markets. You go right now to the markets and you find that prices have gone up. I mean, there are people that have not been able to go to work because either the road they are using to go to work is flooded, or wherever they wherever they work, maybe there's no accessibility. And also there are some jobs, because of the rain, so are shut. Therefore, there's some people that do not have an income. And as we discuss all these things, appreciating that we are all suffering, as we discuss all these things, the children, as I said earlier, the children are like a sponge. Whatever they hear, they do not even know how to filter. They just, collect everything. Therefore, even as we discuss all these things, the news of how bad the economy is, how the situation, how bad, how it's going to get worse even, because, like today, I listened to someone saying, oh, actually, I was in the supermarket and I was just ahead of them, and someone was saying, oh, actually, the meteorological department says whatever has just happened, hiyo ilikuwa kionjo, it's gonna be worse. Imagine if that is a child hearing this kind of news and you want to assure them that it's gonna be better. How will you even, as a parent, if they went to a supermarket and they had that, if I had a child and they had a person say that, do you think how would I be able to even convince my child that these rains are not getting worse? So clearly what we're saying is, as parents, we have a duty also. As much as we understand it's getting worse, the situation is getting worse or better, but it's getting better anyway. The rains are subsiding, as we have all seen, but in whatever, and not just for the floods, but I'm talking about any other, calamities or tragedies. Whenever we know the magnitude, then we need to know as parents how to filter the kind of information that we'll be sharing with our children, because in the end, it is creating a lot of, confusion in them. And by the way, these are the things that, because things like trauma, for your information, trauma is created not only because of tough situations that we saw. Actually, trauma comes to us through our five senses. It is hearing, touch, taste, and all those other, senses. So imagine a child will hear it, and this is now going to be, harbored in their emotions, and this is going to affect them in the future, how they perceive news, good or bad. They lack that ability or capability to be able to the ability or capability to get to know how to deal with their emotions, to know how bad or how not so bad this situation is. Okay. Unfortunately, I've been unable to project. I've been unable to project, but I hope I have been very helpful. I've just tried to go through the minutes that perhaps you had told me to be able to, so that, and I hope.
Vero, maybe I can ask a question that will probably help with perspective. The perspective you've shared is mostly for smaller children. And maybe you can also add in something, because most of us in the group have older children in terms of preteens and teens. Also children who are away from school. Maybe they are away in school already, and every day they are wondering whether tulibebwa na mafuriko huku nje. Whenever it rains, I mean, that child will probably know their parents live in a vulnerable place. They'll just be thinking about their parents, or maybe even a child who left the parents having moved. Maybe you are living in an Airbnb, or even maybe with a relative, because the situation was so bad. Maybe your house flooded and everything. Like just that space in terms of, first of all, how do we handle ourselves? Because I believe most of the times children can actually get fear transference from us in terms of, I'm so worried, I'm so panicked. And that is what they keep on absorbing, that energy from us. So first of all, what can I do for myself? Because I mean, my child is not here, but probably I want to also reassure myself, maybe the school they're in, they're also safe, because right now there are so many things going on. There is also the LGBTQ thing that is also doing rounds in schools. which is also a concern to many parents. And so probably just thinking about teenagers, probably the rest of the time we can reflect on raising older children, and probably in terms of the effects of the floods on them and how they are processing it, especially also parents whose children are away. So how do they, first of all, just go through this season with grace? In terms of, honestly, we don't know whether the floods will continue or not, because the climate change is very crazy. Even like we had heat waves a while ago. Was it early this year? Yeah, I think it was early this year. First of all, January and February was very rainy, which was unusual. And then April, there was like, was it March? And then also last year, like kumekuwa na hizi time kuna heat waves, unasikia nikaa jua is boiling on us. Yeah, so probably just speak into that, but with a perspective on older children. How do we handle that if we are raising teens and preteens also?
Okay. Now, maybe the same way, obviously, starting off as a parent, obviously understanding that the tough times have affected everyone, irrespective of whether you're taking care of toddler, whether you are pregnant, because I know even you could be pregnant now, and then obviously the fear cuts across, because the one thing that is true is every parent, we are told you are always your parent's child, irrespective of how old, irrespective of who you are, you still continue being your mother's child. And mothers, as our parents, so to speak, always those people that get very, very concerned about their children at a moment like this. And I know for sure, everybody right now is at that point of, we are all apprehensive. We don't know, are our children safe in schools? Are our children safe in dormitories? And the worst thing is that, as is expected in so many of, especially the public schools, unless it is very important that you be in school, or unless the school has called you, sometimes you find that no school allows us to go and visit our children or get to understand the situation of the school. But one thing that is true is that as a parent, just like we have said, considering that the number one thing is to understand that, if you know the school, of course, the environment that your child is in, obviously, one of the things is looking at the weather forecast. We are all sure that this area has been affected more than these other area, and that already puts a lot of fear in children, but rather in parents. But the one thing that I know these days, the privileges that parents have are privileges like, number one, we have the privilege of having, I've seen people, schools have WhatsApp groups where they are able to even put like a rep, parent rep, and also to put a class teacher, or actually I've seen class teachers being in groups, in parent groups. And obviously, for the fact that this is that time when everybody is apprehensive, this is that time when everybody really wants to know that other person is safe. I'm sure by, first of all, getting to have even conversations like, it's time now, parents requested for such conversations as the situation with the current floods. How are our children? Because truth of the matter is, we have all concentrated so much about grades. We all want to ask, how are they doing academically? Even when you read in those groups, I'm sure if any one of you is in these groups, you'll agree with me that the one thing that we have been discussing so much is, how are they performing academically? How did they perform? How did class A perform as compared to class B? Which class is looking like they are going to be doing better maybe in the final exams? So I think it's time also for this one season when everyone has gone through this disaster. It's time that parents bold up and pick up a topic like, hey, could we be updated on how is school, how are our children faring? Because truth is, you could be lucky to have a child in their school, and therefore you could be asking them when they come back home, how was school today? How was this and that? But now imagine a person who will now see their child during the school holidays. It cannot be any easy to think that, oh gosh, I don't even know, are there rains? Are there more rains? I'm imagining we also have schools in places like Maimahiu, where many parents, I don't know if we have any in this group with kids in Mai Mahiu, in all those other places that are flooding, we have parents with kids in those places. So it's time that parents bring up such topics, so that even the class reps, because I know the PTA reps who are obviously themselves parents, and I know PTA reps are normally allowed to go to schools. So this helps a lot, so that you see, like the way the bold the bold parent has a moment to just talk about parenting, or any other groups talks about that. I think it's time the parents also bold up and say, hey, in our class, could we just talk about our kids' status at the moment? Because, well, it affects all of us.
Yeah, that is helpful. And I hope we can probably do that. If you can just ask in the groups that we are in. We are also in a group, our son who is in Kiambu High. So we are in a parents group. So maybe that is also good wisdom in terms of just debrief, even to debrief how our parents feeling. Are there parents who are affected? Sometimes having this conversation, it's not because we have solutions. It's just that we want to show each other that we care, we are concerned. What you're going through is valid, it's legit, and just that part of loving each other through a storm and through a difficult situation. And maybe even as we think about maybe the losses we've gone through, especially, probably not many of us are directly affected. Yeah, but I really love the way one of us shared that someone they know who is in this group was actually affected. So in a group of 200 to 300 parents, we definitely know the effects are devastating. And maybe as we probably wrap up this conversation, it would be just that perspective of what can we do if we are probably going through grief and uncertainties during this time. Probably some of us are even struggling with provision. So this just makes it worse. For example, if your business requires a bit of sunshine that is reliable, like if whatever we are selling is also perishable goods, or maybe just some of us, the commute is also a lot. I don't know what has happened on my route this week. I normally do matatus. I love matatus, number one, and then of course number two, I've been encouraging myself to walk. So using matatu helps me to probably do more steps. And this week I've actually been paying 100 bob just from, I live in Maziwa, if anyone knows, the area around Kahawa West. And from the bypass to Kiambu Road, it has been 100 bob for a whole week. In the morning, I normally leave here at around 6, so that is 100 bob. Normally on a good day, it's usually 50 bob. So when it's double the fare, I was just sitting in that matatu and I was like, I'm grateful to God I'm able to afford this. I'm just looking back at the seasons where I was single, I was struggling. Like my bus fare was just enough for that month. In a way, I'd budgeted everything to the last cent. Yeah, so just parents who are also worrying about provision. Maybe you've not managed to pay school fees. You promised teachers, but you don't know where the school fees will come from. All those are griefs in terms of just the anxieties we are struggling with, in terms of just the dynamics of parenting and the uncertainties and the ups and lows of dollar. So probably you can also speak into that in terms of just how do we grieve well, whatever situations we are struggling with, which is different for everyone in this meeting, and of course also in the bigger group. You can speak to that as we wrap this up.
I'm sorry, perhaps I didn't hear you. Could you ask the question again, please?
Okay, so I'm just describing some of these griefs that we can just have, including even the inflation on life. And then maybe things are more expensive. I have to spend more. We are going through probably some level of scarcity. We maybe not paid school fees. All those can actually make us feel some level of sadness. We're just grieving our inability to probably provide or even to be there for our children in the way we want. How do we deal with that situation as parents?
Okay.
In terms of just those emotions that are low feelings. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. The lack of, the inability to provide fully, like when how a parent, just like you have explained earlier, how you budget for something and the inflated costs end up forcing you to go or spend over what budgets you had set aside. And truth of the matter is, it's a tough time, and sometimes, especially with parents that have smaller kids that can never understand. It's easier when you have younger kids. I mean, older kids that would understand if you say there's no bread, or if you say there's no we are not going to have these, we're not going to have internet, we're not going to have all these things. But it's really difficult, and I mean, I really sympathize, especially this time with parents, because it's been a very tough time, especially for people that, I mean, everything is now gone overboard. Costs have been escalated, and you wonder what went wrong. And truth of the matter is, even as we are all working towards, achieving goals and being able to understand how to work around the little that we have, maybe what I would advise, especially parents that have children, is depending on what age your child is, because then it would only be workable if your children are at a certain age. But depending on what age children, I mean, as a parent, whatever ages of children you have, if there are those that can understand the situations, then you need to explain to them about the situation. But those that do not understand and cannot, imagine a child who has to carry snacks to school, has to go to, I mean, especially use the school bus, do all those things. And now, because of the lack of funds, the lack of constant funds, and especially for people that are in businesses that have been affected. So the one thing, depending on whether your child can understand or whether you as a parent can be able to, there are some things you can be able to forego only for this season, because then, as we are saying, the rains are only for a short while, even though these ones look like they are not ending anytime soon. But depending on what you can be able to, the costs that you can cut, there are those necessities, and there are those what you would call the luxuries. And I think this is the time when we would maybe be we sort of like concentrate on the necessities, and then the luxuries is what we can perhaps streamline, or whether if you've been doing, I mean, whatever amount of money, like Babs has just said that once in a while she has been wanting the matatus because they also help her to be able to do her, to count on her calories and do all that. So I think it's also a time when we are all being challenged to not only, I mean, in terms of how to, save that one little coin. The only way we can do that is the most important things to do, the essentials. Then, I mean, there are those that we cannot go with that, but those that we know are luxuries, then for just this season until when things stabilize, then we can be able to work around and see how to forgo some. Yes, that's how I would say it.
Yeah, thank you, Vero. I think that is very insightful. And probably just to add on it is also just that part of, I just believe, like, personally, in the power of prayer, just having that confident hope in God. Yeah, that God is able to come through for us. God loves us. God cares for our families. God is able to preserve us, and the other aspect is just self-care, just be mindful of how you are also handling this situation. There's one perspective that I've learned this week that I've found very helpful in terms of when I'm going through a situation, also my wellness, in terms of probably even my mental well-being, or sometimes even my spiritual calmness, can actually help me go through difficult things with a better perspective. Because there's sometimes situations may find me in a place where I am not feeling well, I'm not feeling stable, I'm not feeling probably grounded in terms of just how I see it and how I handle it. And so what happens, I actually feel like everything is out of control and out of perspective. And I've been through so many seasons like those ones, where you felt like maybe I overreacted over this situation because it found me not in a good place. And sometimes traumatic incidences actually happen because of how they find us. The way Vero has mentioned that it's about our five senses. So I can perceive a situation probably worse than it actually is, or sometimes also something can happen to me that is of a very high magnitude, but because it found me in a good situation, in a good posture, with a good attitude, with good mental health, with emotional stability, then I'm able to handle it better. So to just keep on being mindful about where we are, even struggling sometimes. Yeah, sometimes I usually see myself like in struggles or probably in situations that are not so perfect. And to just be able to acknowledge, like when you need help, make sure you get it. When you're feeling like this is too much and it's probably out of control, don't be ashamed of just saying, you know what, I need help. Probably I need to talk to a good friend. I usually say when the stress is minimal, when it is on this level that is very, very low, what you can do at that time is probably even just have a good conversation with a friend, go for coffee, read a good book, listen to something positive and uplifting, even pray, and that can resolve it. And then sometimes you may feel like, imepanda kidogo, it's here, but it's still in the middle. It's a bit average. And that is a good time to probably go and seek for help. Sometimes it's talking to someone who is a bit more skillful than probably just my networks. These things that are low here, and taongea with a good friend or a close person, and sometimes it's just a phone call and then I feel better. But sometimes you can feel like, yeah, I've talked to my friends, I've explained to people, I feel like probably they don't get it, or maybe I'm not feeling better. So that could be a good opportunity for us to feel like now that one is up here and maybe I need to get some help, So don't be ashamed if you need to go for therapy to debrief what's happening in your life or even in your family. Even those symptoms that Vero is mentioning, you will feel like probably my child, I'm actually feeling very concerned in terms of their character change, or maybe just their reactions have really changed drastically. There's mood change drastically, or maybe they have paranoia, fear. I remember there's a season during those floods we ever went out, and then we were visiting a relative. And then my husband had traveled, so I'm the one who was driving. And then my daughter in the evening was like, Dad is not here. We need to leave early before it starts raining. I was like, this one doesn't trust my driving skills enough, and probably it's because of the way she had me tell my husband, no, I don't want to go for that event. What if it rains and then it floods? I don't want to get caught up. And so probably that conversation actually transferred fear in her. And I remember also another mom who will say, whenever the clouds start gathering and the clouds change in terms of the climate, that child would actually insist they need to go home because maybe she doesn't feel safe outside. And so just keep on observing and keep on adjusting. And at the same time, just learn how to breathe. I usually say when you're feeling overwhelmed, and maybe sometimes you feel like I can't explain why I'm feeling these intense emotions, just learn to close your eyes, breathe in and out. Just learn to do that. You can even do that quietly. You can just go to the washroom and breathe in and out so that you can just learn how to calm yourself down. Because sometimes our bodies can also exaggerate reactions. And of course, they will exaggerate how we feel and exaggerate how we will behave and respond. Yeah, that was such a good opportunity. Thank you, Veronica, for coming out here to just share perspective with us on this. And of course, as we think about it, we want to just spend a few minutes praying and then we will be done with this webinar. And I want us to just take some time, first of all, to thank God for our children. Just thank God for the gift of family. We thank God also for carrying us through. Like I said, we are the parents who survived COVID, and then we are here surviving through, and of course, we thrived through COVID, and we are here also thriving through the floods. And we don't know what else will come, just that aspect of whatever comes my way, God, my life is in your hands. I will not fear the future. I will not fear the uncertainties. I will not fear the dollar inflations and everything just going up and down. I mean, some of us probably, I can see the mixed feelings. There's a certain group, that is very, very, very political. It's actually a CEO's group. And so like when Ruto was going and then the jet that is 200 million, there was such a heated conversation. Of course, the ones who are pro, the ones who are anti. And then later, there was also this aspect of now he's gotten all the money that he's gotten. That can also make some people feel afraid. Some people are excited. And whichever side you're in, even as we just think about the government's up and downs, it's just that part of remembering my life is in God's hands, my family is in God's hands, our provision and our future is in God's hands. So maybe we can just take some minutes and we'll just pray for our children and our family. If you have any questions, please type them on the comment as well, and then we'll just take time to respond to them. I want to play some music that we were playing before, to just remind ourselves about the blessing of God for our families and for our generations. Just switch off my video, and then I'm going to play that song called The Blessing. But meanwhile, just take time to close your eyes and just thank God for your children. We thank God for the uncertainties. Lord, we thank you that our lives are in your hands. Our children are in your hands. Their future is in your hands. Their present is in your hands. Even the past, you're the one who formed them in our wombs and you gave them to our families. You also just formed them, Lord. Even dads who are here, you formed them through our wives' wombs. Lord, we thank you. We thank you. We thank you for the gift of family. We wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be worried if we didn't have other people who are depending on us, who are relying on us. And Lord, we just want to thank you for the blessing. We thank you, Lord, for the blessings. I want to play this song and then I'll just keep on pausing it in different places as we pray. We just want to cast all our cares unto God because he cares for us. So let me just play it. Give it a moment, and then I need to share the sound. Share sound. Yeah.
The